You ever wake up one morning thinking it's just gonna be another quiet day, and instead find out you've been drafted into a war you didn't even start? That's exactly what happened to me. My name's Daniel Mercer, 40 years old, former Navy engineer. These days I work as a freelance marine technician out of Seaside Bay, Florida. Small coastal town where retirees sip coffee on their porches and pelicans dive for breakfast. After 12 years serving at sea, I thought I'd finally earned some peace and quiet. Turns out peace is a fragile thing when you've got a homeowners association run by a woman who thinks she's God's personal property manager. Her name was Linda Prescott. Though everyone called her Madam President, she wore that title like armor. Perfect blonde hair, white blazer, clipboard glued to her hand, and a Range Rover that could have paid for 3 of my mortgages. Now, behind my modest yellow house sat the one thing that actually made me feel grounded. A 1973 Navy patrol boat I'd bought from a government auction. She wasn't pretty. Gray hull faded, rust freckles all over her sides. But that ship was identical to the one I'd served on during my last deployment. The one where I lost 2 of my closest friends, Harris and Cole, during a storm off Djibouti. Every morning I'd sit on her deck with my coffee, run my hand over the old controls and just remember it wasn't a boat to me, it was a memorial. That boat was my church, so imagine my face when I pulled a crisp white envelope from my mailbox one Tuesday and read, "Dear Mr. Mercer, it has come to the attention of the Seaside Bay HOA that you are harboring an eyesore in clear violation of community standards. The rusted vessel behind your property must be removed within 30 days, or you will face escalating fines and legal action." Signed in a sweeping cursive, Linda Prescott, HOA President. I stared at that letter until my coffee went cold. Then I laughed, because honestly I thought it was some kind of joke. My boat sat on my own property, registered, insured, well within my lot lines. No harm to anyone. But curiosity got the best of me. So that afternoon I walked to Linda's mansion, 3 stories of Mediterranean excess, and knocked on her door. She opened it, standing there with her 2 toy poodles like some villain from a country club soap opera. "Mrs. Prescott," I said, trying to sound calm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. That eyesore in my backyard? That's a Navy patrol boat. Legally parked, sentimental value. It's not just some junker." She smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mr. Mercer, I'm sure your little tugboat has sentimental value, but this is a respectable neighborhood. We have standards. Your vessel brings down property values." The words, patrol boat, not tugboat, I replied, still polite but tightening inside. "Well," she said, closing her clipboard with a snap, "whatever it is, it doesn't belong here." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a boat. It was about control. 2 weeks passed. I figured she'd get bored and move on to barking about someone's mailbox color. But one Saturday morning I stepped out with my coffee and froze. My boat looked like a crime scene. Bright red graffiti across the hull, junk, letters 3 feet tall. Navigation lights smashed, glass everywhere, hull dented. And the fresh sealant I'd applied was stripped off in jagged claw marks. My knees actually buckled. I dropped my mug. It shattered on the dock. It felt like standing over a grave that had been desecrated. I took photos, every angle, and then I saw something shining in the sunlight near the stern. A pair of leather gloves, women's size. Designer stitching, red paint smeared across the fingertips. I bagged them like evidence from a crime show. That night, I sent Linda an email. Attached all the pictures, even zoomed in on the gloves. I asked her to pay $9,200 for repairs. Her reply came within an hour. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Perhaps you should invest in better security instead of making wild accusations." The arrogance in those words made my blood boil, but I kept my cool because I knew something she didn't. My neighbor Miguel Alvarez had cameras on his garage facing my dock. Next morning, Miguel knocked on my door, grin wide as the Gulf. "Brother, you're gonna want to see this." On his monitor, clear as daylight, Linda Prescott. In black clothes, spray can in one hand, crowbar in the other. Timestamp 2:14 a.m. She painted, smashed, and then dropped her gloves like some second-rate cat burglar. Miguel chuckled. "She's done this to half the block in smaller ways, man." You just got the proof. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt something colder. Purpose. I sent her another email, this time with the footage. Told her to make it right before I took it public. 3 days later, I got another envelope. Not an apology, but a $500 HOA fine for property neglect. That's when I knew it wasn't just personal, it was war. Then came the land survey, a thick packet from a company called Precision Property Services, claiming the land where my dock sat wasn't actually mine. According to their new survey, my property line ended 15 feet before the water line, meaning the dock and my boat were on community land. They even stamped it with a notary seal. Looked official, too official. Luckily, I still had the original survey from when I bought the place. When I compared them side by side, it was obvious. Someone had copied my real map and just shifted the lines. Forgery. I took both documents to a city legal aid, Sarah Torres, who'd sat through a dozen HOA hearings where Linda humiliated residents for trivial nonsense. Sarah squinted at the papers. Daniel, this isn't just harassment. This is felony-level forgery. Whoever did this could serve time. And let me guess, your HOA president suddenly wants that waterfront access? Bingo, we started digging. Meanwhile, Linda began her neighborhood beautification campaign, going door to door with a petition to remove my boat. She told everyone it was polluting the bay, that I was bringing in the wrong crowd. By the end of the week, half the neighborhood was giving me side-eye like I was some toxic dump operator. I'd wave. They'd cross the street. The isolation hit harder than I expected. I'd fought storms in the middle of the ocean and buried brothers in arms. But nothing prepared me for the slow poison of being ostracized in your own neighborhood. Still, I wasn't going to roll over. Sarah traced the fake survey to a private contractor, one Evan Ross, who, funny enough, had done inspection work for Linda's husband's construction firm. Small world, right? Then Miguel came through again with something huge. Man, you're not gonna believe this. The HOA president's nephew's been hanging around the docks late at night. Looks nervous as hell. Turns out Tyler, 19, was Linda's nephew. Kid looked like guilt personified. Pale, jumpy, couldn't make eye contact. One night I found him at the bait shop. I said casually, "Hey, Tyler, you ever see anyone messing with my boat?" He stammered, No, sir, not that night." I hadn't mentioned a night his eyes gave it all away. But I didn't push. Not yet. That weekend I swept around my dock with a metal detector and found something buried in the sand. A flashlight engraved L. Prescott. Same red paint on the rim. Another souvenir. Now I had physical evidence, video footage, and a nervous accomplice. Linda still didn't back down. She filed an environmental complaint, claimed my boat was leaking fuel and damaging the bay. The county inspector who showed up looked shady from the start. He sniffed the air, poked the dock with a stick, and said, "Yep, I'll have to write this up." Except my boat hadn't been fueled in months. Sarah dug into his record. Turns out he'd been paid, under the table by none other than Prescott. Construction for favorable reports on their condos. The man was on Linda's payroll. At that point, it wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was organized corruption. We gathered everything, video, gloves, flashlight, financial ties, and filed for an emergency hearing before Linda could push her injunction to have my boat seized. The night before court, my phone started blowing up. Anonymous posts across boating forums, accusing me of operating illegally, saying my license was revoked. Fake documents circulated online. Even the logos matched state forms. Within hours, clients canceled contracts. My biggest deal, a $60,000 yacht restoration, evaporated overnight. Linda had moved the battle online. I barely slept that night. Sat on my boat staring at the calm water, thinking of Harris and Cole. I whispered, "Guess we're back in a fight, boys." Morning came like a fog, heavy, gray, and quiet. My phone was still buzzing with messages from clients demanding explanations about the fake reports. I didn't even bother answering. There was only one thing on my mind, the hearing. I threw on my old Navy jacket, the one with the faded patch, and drove to the courthouse. As I pulled in, I saw Linda stepping out of her silver Range Rover like she was arriving at a red carpet event. White blazer, pearl earrings, that smug little smirk plastered on her face. Her lawyer, a woman who looked like she billed by the minute, followed close behind. Linda waved at me across the parking lot like we were old friends. "Morning, Daniel. Ready to lose that rust bucket?" I just smiled. "Hope you brought your checkbook." Inside the courtroom, her legal team came armed with photos of my boat, printouts of environmental concerns, and a parade of statements from residents she'd manipulated. They painted me as a reckless loner, a guy who didn't care about safety or property values, some ex-Navy dropout running an illegal marina behind his house. When it was my turn, Sarah stood tall, calm, and precise. She began with Miguel's footage, the crystal-clear video of Linda herself spray-painting my boat. You could have heard a pin drop when the judge paused the clip on Linda's face mid-swing with that crowbar. Then came the gloves, the engraved flashlight, the fraudulent survey, the bank transfers between her husband's company and the crooked inspector, and finally, the sworn statement from young Tyler, Linda's own nephew. The judge leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Mrs. Prescott," she said evenly, "is there anything you'd like to say before I render judgment?" Linda stood, trembling just slightly, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "Your Honor, this is a conspiracy. These people are fabricating lies to ruin my reputation. That boat is an eyesore and a health hazard. He brought this on himself." "Ma'am," the judge said, raising an eyebrow, "the only hazard I see here is your behavior, and that was it. Case dismissed." All fines against me dropped. Linda was ordered to pay full restitution for the vandalism, my legal fees, and punitive damages for filing fraudulent claims, totaling $450,000. But it didn't end there. The judge referred the case to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Vandalism, fraud, conspiracy, document forgery, bribery. You could see it hit her like a slow-motion wave. The courtroom whisper spread like wildfire. I should have felt joy. Instead, I just sat there like numb tired. Wars don't end with parades. They end with paperwork and silence. Still, it felt good to finally breathe. When I got home, the neighborhood was different. People who hadn't spoken to me in months came over with casseroles and apologies. Margaret next door said, "We were scared of her." "Dan?" She fined me for hanging a flag on Memorial Day. I should have stood up sooner. Word spread fast that the Queen of Seaside Bay was under criminal investigation. Linda disappeared from public view, canceled HOA meetings, locked her gates, and stopped her morning power walks. For a few weeks, I almost believed it was over. Until an old man with a weathered face knocked on my door one evening, holding a manila folder. "Name's Walter Jennings," he said. "Retired accountant. Been keeping records on our lovely president for years. Figured you might know what to do with this." Inside that folder was the real jackpot. Spreadsheets, statements, canceled checks. Walter had tracked every dollar Linda had stolen from the HOA maintenance fund. She'd been paying for luxury vacations, spa treatments, the new roof on her mansion, all under emergency repairs. 5 years. Over 200 grand gone. I warned the board, Walter said, shaking his head. They either quit or she threatened them. "But you've got the guts to finish this." We took it straight to Detective Rosa Martinez, who was handling the vandalism case. When she saw the numbers, she let out a low whistle. "This isn't petty theft," she said. "This is felony embezzlement and racketeering." Within a week, the Financial Crimes Unit had warrants. The morning of her arrest was something the whole town talked about for months. Linda was at the Seaside Country Club, playing doubles tennis with her rich friends, when 2 uniformed officers walked onto the court. They waited until she finished her serve before announcing the charges. "Mrs. Prescott," one officer said, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, and vandalism." Witnesses said she froze, racket halfway down, then screamed that she was being set up. Tried to call her lawyer, tried to call the mayor. They cuffed her right there in front of her tennis buddies. The Queen had fallen. When news hit, the neighborhood was electric. People gathered at the marina just to see if it was real. Walter showed up with a cooler of beer, grinning like Christmas came early. "Told you karma keeps receipts," he said, but the story wasn't done. A few days later, Tyler came to my house. Kid looked like a ghost, pale, trembling, eyes red from lack of sleep. "Mr. Mercer," he started, voice cracking. "You don't know everything. My aunt. She made me do worse things than the boat. He sat down and told me everything. How she'd used him as her little enforcer, slashing tires, breaking mailboxes, planting trash in people's yards. How she'd bought his parents' mortgage from the bank when his dad lost his job and used it to blackmail him. She said if I didn't help, she'd call in the loan and make us homeless, he whispered. Then he dropped the real bomb. She wanted me to plant drugs in your truck, he said, shaking. Said it'd be poetic justice. The dangerous veteran caught by police. I couldn't do it. That's when she turned on me, too. I just sat there, hands gripping the armrest, feeling my stomach twist. I'd known she was vindictive, but framing me for a felony? That was a new level of evil. Tyler turned himself in that week and gave a full confession. Between his testimony, Walter's financial records, and all our physical evidence, the DA had enough to bury her 10 times over. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Linda walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her once perfect hair pulled into a ponytail. She looked smaller, older, like all the poison she'd spewed had finally eaten her from the inside. The prosecutor went down the list: vandalism, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, embezzlement, intimidation. It was like reading the resume of a supervillain. Tyler took the stand, voice steady. He told the truth. Every ugly, humiliating detail. The crowd gasped when he described the drug planting plan. Walter followed, presenting spreadsheets with the calm pride of a man who'd waited years to be heard. When it was my turn, I didn't talk about anger or revenge. I talked about Harris and Cole, about what that boat meant, how every bolt and rivet carried memories of brothers who never came home. She didn't just vandalize a boat, I said. She desecrated a memorial. The judge was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at Linda. Mrs. Prescott, she said, you abused a position of trust, terrorized your neighbors, corrupted your own family, and stole from the people you swore to serve. You are a menace to your community and a disgrace to the law. She sentenced Linda to 8 years in prison, plus 5 years of probation, and ordered full restitution, $450,000 to be paid to the victims. The gasp in the courtroom was almost musical. As the bailiff led her away, she turned toward me, eyes blazing with that same pride that got her there in the first place. But this time it wasn't power, it was fear. 6 months later, life in Seaside Bay felt like a different world. The HOA was rebuilt from scratch, this time led by none other than Sarah Torres, who ran it with fairness and transparency. Walter became treasurer, naturally. Miguel's cameras became the official community security system. My boat, the same one Linda called junk, became a local landmark. Parents brought their kids down to see it. I started giving tours, telling stories about Harris and Cole, about service and sacrifice. That old ship went from vandalized wreck to symbol of resilience. One evening, we held a community barbecue on the dock. Sunset painted the water gold. Miguel grilled fish, Walter cracked jokes, Sarah gave a small speech about standing up to bullies. Tyler showed up too, clean-cut, back in school, trying to make things right. When he apologized to everyone, no one shouted him down. They just listened. Forgiveness has a strange way of healing what fear once broke. When the party wound down, I stayed behind, sitting alone on the deck of my restored patrol boat. The water was calm, the air smelled of salt and charcoal. I ran my fingers over the polished controls and thought about how this all began. A letter in my mailbox, a woman drunk on power, and a battle I never wanted but couldn't avoid. Funny how life works. Sometimes the thing meant to destroy you becomes the reason you stand taller. I looked at the horizon and whispered, "We did it, boys." The waves lapped softly against the hull, like an answer. You know, people still ask me if it was worth it, all the stress, the court dates, the sleepless nights. And I tell them this: you can rebuild a boat. You can't rebuild your dignity once you let someone take it from you. So yeah, it was worth every scar. What about you? Have you ever dealt with someone like Linda? Someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them? Drop your story down in the comments. I've got a feeling Seaside Bay isn't the only neighborhood with a tyrant in heels, because sometimes justice doesn't come from the courtroom. It comes from refusing to surrender.